Welcome you and thank you all for joining us for the Iowa Ideas Big Idea session. This is the Ally Advocate Activist session. The goal of this session is just for us really to learn from one another and share some ideas that we can potentially implement to strengthen our community and create positive social change. We are going to take a deeper dive into understanding what it means to be an ally, an advocate, or an activist. And really the purpose of this conversation today is to discuss and identify different ways that we can collectively or even individually co-create a community of belonging. Before we get started, we do have a quick message from our sponsor, Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust.
Hi, I'm James Klein, president of Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, and I challenge all of you to think big. Now that you walk away from this conference, what are you going to do? What are some big ideas that have been percolating in your brain that you want to move forward and hopefully change what we're doing each and every day? Thank you for attending. Share those big ideas, and let's make everywhere a better place.
Again, thank you to our sponsor, Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, for the Big Ideas session. I am going to take a moment to share my screen, introduce myself and my co-moderator, Stephanie Munsterman-Scriven. Okay. Stephanie, it looks like I'm having some technical difficulties suddenly.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, it's up.
It is up. Okay. We had this all planned out, very professional. It was very organized, everyone. And then, of course, just at the moment when you hit play, it all messes up. So are we seeing a slide that says activism is a ladder? Okay. Yes. I'm going to just go back a couple slides here. So again, my name is Angelica Vanetta. I am one of your moderators today. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm Senior Manager of Community and Volunteer Engagement at United Way of East Central Iowa. I also serve as the co-chair of Inclusive ICR, and I'm involved in the Marion Civil Rights Commission and Monsoon Asian and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity. My role at United Way is to advance equity through civic engagement and volunteer service in our 5-county area. And one of my key passions is to be an advocate for civil and human rights and make sure that everyone has equitable access to opportunities. And here to join me, as I mentioned, is Stephanie Munsterman-Scriven, and I'll have her introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon. So glad you're all here. As she said, my name is Stephanie Munsterman-Scriven, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve as the executive director of the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission. And as you see on the screen, I also serve on the ACLU of Iowa board as the president. I serve on the Iowa Advisory Board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And I also get to work with Angelica on the Inclusive ICR Advisory Board. The focus of the Civil Rights Commission, we are here to eliminate discrimination and disparities and to increase equity in our community. And we do this by investigation and mediation of discrimination complaints, along with providing education and outreach to our community. My core values center on kindness and compassion and furthering civil and human rights. That is my North Star. And I'm so glad that you're all here. So let's talk about what does it mean when we're talking about big ideas. As you're very well aware, the Ideas Conference has been full of information, new ideas, and different ways to address issues. And this session, the Big Idea Ally Advocate Activist, gives us the time to discuss how we can continue to move forward and to maintain momentum in order to create the community of belonging. Belonging goes beyond diversity, equity, inclusion, metrics, programs, and processes. It's talking about being more than being seen. It includes having a meaningful voice and the right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. It's more than just being included. So this session is the opportunity for us individually and collectively to process and discuss what we have heard and what we have learned. And it's a platform to discuss ways in which we can take action to address inequities and empower others. Again, we're thrilled that you have joined us, and we are thankful for your willingness to discuss this critical issue with one another. Now, yes, this session is entitled The Big Idea. However, we are each in a different place along our journey. What might be considered a big idea for me might not resonate or be relevant for you. So this session is about determining ways in which you, as an individual or collectively, can impact social change. And so some of the things you see on the slide include the different opportunities to unpack your aha moments, your surprises, what spoke to you, what resonates with you. How do we want to address those inequities and impact social change?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And before we get into the conversation with each other, we really wanted to frame this around the activist ladder, which is often referred to in community and civic engagement. So just imagine a ladder, and we are kind of climbing up that ladder, and each of us might be at a different rung on that ladder, depending on what the issue or the topic is at hand. But what's really important is to identify how it is that you want to show up in this space. What change or impact is it that is driving you, but also what level of engagement fits with your values and the capacity that you have both in time and talent. And so the first step is support, in which you recognize that an issue or a challenge exists. And then you begin to do something about that, or in this case, to be an ally and commit to listening and learning, but also to educate yourself and others, and just engaging with other people in your circle of influence and control. We understand that sometimes allyship has been criticized for its low stakes engagement, where we can just simply hit the share button or comment on something. So we certainly want you to be cautious of coming across as performative. But you can back that up by using your vote or your purchase power to show that you are a true ally. And some of us have the capacity and drive to begin to do more and really to be an outspoken advocate, someone who's committed to outcomes and who's willing to publicly support activists and amplify their voices through things like education and public awareness, grassroots mobilization, and even sometimes lobbying for certain issues. Then we continue to move up that ladder, and we have our activists. And these are typically people who are courageous, relentless, they're committed and dedicated and putting their life's work into the mission of moving society forward. And they're truly committed to that greater good. So when we're having conversations about what do some solutions look like if we want to create a community of belonging, if we want to diversify our workforce, if we want people to feel included, we can start by being an ally, then potentially moving to being advocates, and then truly being leaders as activists. And so this opportunity today is really just to say, I have this idea. Who is willing to collaborate with me? Who wants to come alongside me and move this forward?
Thank you for walking us through that ladder, Angelica. It's a very good visual. And as you said, sometimes depending on the issue, we might be up here as an activist. On another issue, we might be an ally, depending on your personal passions and your own issues that might be really strong for you. So this is meant to be a conversation. This is not Angelica and I in a teaching moment. This is a conversation for us to come together. So please, as it says on the screen, share your thoughts. This is a safer and braver space for all of the participants. We do ask that you actively and respectfully listen to one another. We ask that you commit to learning and being curious. That's the best way to learn. We also ask that you take the time that you need to speak, but yet please be mindful of the need of others to have time to speak. So as it says here, we invite that spirit of curiosity and we encourage the use of the chat box. So please do feel free to use the chat box if you have the access to do so. Some of our best learning comes from one another. Sometimes I teach at Mount Mercy College and I learn so much from the students, and the students learn so much, probably more from them than me as a teacher. And so I think that is such a powerful way to learn. If you do wish to ask a question or to respond, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or you can type your question in the chat box. We do welcome an open dialogue, and we hope that you engage with your fellow conference attendees. Just pretend that we're all in a room together and there's no camera, and that we're just having a conversation with your favorite beverage and appetizers over lunch. And just pretend that's what we're doing, and it can lead to a really strong conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. As she said, we want to make sure that you actively and respectfully listen to each other and certainly take the time that you need to speak, but also be mindful of the time other people want to share their thoughts and ideas. So we do have a few prompt questions, which we will put in the chat box when I'm done sharing my screen here, because again, we just want to take away the camera, take away these little boxes that we're finding ourselves in, and just imagine that we're all in this one group together having a big conversation, hence the big idea. But the prompts that we want you to be thinking about are, what do you think are major barriers and challenges in overcoming inequities, again, as it relates to diversity, inclusion, and justice? Discuss any ideas or opportunities that you have for addressing these inequities, but also empowering others and how to impact social change. We would love to hear your recommendations on any future learning. I think we can always be lifelong learners. This might be work that you've been doing for a very long time. You know, Stephanie and I have been working together for quite some time in this space, but we're always still learning, and we're always still searching for new ways to learn more about these issues at hand, whether it's a podcast, a movie, a book, a blog post. And then, of course, just be thinking about any ways that you yourself can create a sense of belonging. So I'll stop sharing my screen here, and we can start our conversation. And it looks like Stephanie has gone ahead and put those prompt questions in the chat box. So hopefully you all can see that. And at any moment, if you would like to take yourself off camera, you are welcome to do so. You can use the raise the hand feature if you would like to just throw out an idea, any thoughts. It would be, perhaps we can start off with, what were some of your aha moments that you had over the past couple of days? It looks like Pastor Sorrentino has some information to add. So I believe, can you unmute yourself, or do we need to unmute you?
You should be able to hear me now.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My friends, as president, as chief executive director, and also as executive director of New Hope in Christ Ministries, I bring all of you a sense of affirmation and a sense of self-worth in these turbulent times. I also work with the Office of Public Engagement as a chief officer in the Faith and Inclusion Directives in Washington. This is how we align the church, as myself, as an official, with the general milieu and also the vicissitudes of human life. The church has been woefully behind for centuries in recognizing the intrinsic self-worth of all individuals. And we have only confined our narratives to that which we can doctrinally accept. I am here today to tell you, as a religious activist of one of over 40 years and as a professor emeritus, I am here to tell you that those days are over in the church. We are more than willing to listen to everyone, including marginalized groups and groups which have suffered affliction and oppression for centuries. There are narratives within the general church body and the universal church Catholic which have never been heard nor hearkened to, because unfortunately, theologians like myself, at times we were censored, at times we were excoriated, and at times we were oblivious to the realities of the iconoclastic theological towers and the milieu of people underneath them. We apologize for our arrogance. We apologize for our insolence. And we apologize for the fact that we have not always accepted every person on this planet of whatever race, whatever ethnicity, whatever sexual orientation, whatever non-binary or binary identification, or however one wants to self-describe. We are moving into a new century. We no longer are constrained by biblical moralisms, nor will we be constrained anymore by perspectives that are as archaic as the Peloponnesian War. We invite, as a new church, revolutionized and galvanized by a new epiphany of revelation, not just revelation that comes from a holy book, but revelation that comes from the consciences of people who interface on this planet for the purpose of the common good. My concern right now, as I interface with Washington each and every week, as yesterday I reviewed Secretary Becerra's HHS objectives and gave informed consent to Congress yesterday by written transcript, I am concerned that there is not enough DEI influence in those recommendations that that Secretary Becerra has released to us as the intelligentsia. And we need to bombard Washington and work with our legislators, congressional aides, and also work with those aligned to all causes, and not be dismayed by partisan or bipartisan rhetoric, which has been designed to purposely obfuscate and subjugate entire movements of human lives. So I invite everyone in this conference to become prophets and revelators of progress, not people of divine recapitulation, as we have been in the church for over 1,800 years, but become visionaries of an esoteric and ephemeral future that all of us can obtain and possess if we just learn to listen to each other's narratives and not just formulate something that we can accept and abide with. All of us on this planet are essentially important, no matter what we believe or how we construct God to be. We all have self-worth and affirmation, and by God, We need to recognize it.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, Pastor Sorrentino. I can definitely hear the passion and the drive that you have to address this within the faith community. I would like to open it up for a conversation from any of our other participants. Again, you can put some thoughts in the chat box, or you can also take yourselves off camera or request to be unmuted. I think you can use, if you logged in through Zoom, you can use the raise the hand feature, because I think that there is certainly a challenge on how do we engage the entire faith community in this work that Pastor Sorrentino is referring to. So if anybody would like to add any commentary to that, we welcome it. I also have something that was added in the chat box, I believe through Huva. There was a message from one of our listeners in here today, and they just are posing an open-ended question. And again, remember, this is a conversation for all of us to have jointly. We may or may not come up with the solution to problems that are you are presenting, but again, open conversation. So how do you get people to talk and communicate during Iowa Youth Congress? They have had problems with getting everyone to interact. They have been doing different activities, but sometimes isn't always working well. So if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions on getting young people to communicate when they are passionate about a specific topic.
This is Tony Wilson. I'm in Des Moines and part of the Reset Cedar Rapids Youth Violence Prevention Program in Cedar Rapids. And my response to that is, all the work that we do, the very first activity, the first thing we talk about is creating a safe environment. We call it sanctuary. So, it's worth taking the time to do that up front. A lot of times we try to get right into our agenda rather than taking time to create that environment. Do a lot through restorative circles as well, but just to make sure people feel safe and that what they have to offer is important. And then just in response to the pastor, I think we're working on our next step with the GVI program in Cedar Rapids is really the reconciliation part. And reconciliation has to start with that apology, and that's what the pastor offered to us. And so I think that's also part of it too, is if you want the conversation, you need to talk about past wrongs before you can talk about moving on.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tony. You're right. The foundation to any good conversation is having a safer space where people feel they are able to air their thoughts without perhaps judgment, without perhaps repercussions. So you're right. A lot of times you want to jump right in, agenda item 1A, let's do it, rather than taking the space and the time to build that community where people are willing and able to share. And youth are no different. They need to have that relationship building. So thank you so much for sharing that, Tony.
You're welcome.
In the chat are a few more questions. We can stay on the question around engagement of youth, or if there's another question that is in the chat that might be calling to you, feel free to unmute yourself or pop something into the chat. We're always looking for ways to create a community where it's equitable, it's inclusive, it's diverse, it's a community of belonging. Like Angelica said, some of us have been in this field for a long time, but I learn something new every day. And I'm hoping to learn from you, our community. I'll start with one. It's in the chat, but however, I read a lot. It's like my favorite thing to do. Some people like movies or books or podcasts. So I'm curious, what are you reading right now? What are you listening to? What is your podcast right now in relationship, to community or to belonging or to diversity, equity, civil rights arena. And if you're not reading something, what's on your your wish list or on your nightstand? Right now, I have a nightstand with about 12 books on it. Don't judge me. And there's more coming because I can't stop getting books to read. So what are you reading right now? What are you listening to?
So I'm the complete opposite, and I don't read a lot because I don't have the time. I do listen to books on tape. So any books on tape that people really like in which the author is the narrator are my favorites. But I did want to share, so last fall, I did listen to Ibram Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist book on tape or audio. He also has a podcast that recently came out, and I believe it's called Be Anti-Racist with Ibram X. Kendi. You should be able to find it on any of your favorite platforms to listen to podcasts. So I would highly recommend that. And it looks like we've got some recommendations in the chat box. And so Kelly is currently reading The Fire This Time, A New Generation Speaks About Race, a collection of essays from several African-American writers. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing.
I have a book that I'm reading right now. I'll just show you. Well, it might be backwards, but it's called Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. It's by Jose Antonio Vargas. It's just talking about his experience and being an immigrant, moving here. It's not about the politics. It's about his experience and just what it was like, his own experience. So it's very good. I try to, diversify my bookshelf by reading books of people who are not white all the time. A lot of times it's historically been white males who are often the ones we get in school or the ones that are on the New York Times bestselling list. So one of the best things you can do is to just diversify your podcast list, like Angelica mentioned, Ibram Kendi, excellent. I read the book, excellent book. And they also call it decolonizing your bookshelf. So it's another way to put that. So, learning from people of color, from Black, Indigenous people of color is really important. And these are great. We have some other ones coming in. Norma says, the conversation, how seeking and speaking the truth about racism can radically transform individuals and organizations, by Robert Livingston. That sounds really interesting, Norma. Thank you for sharing that. And it's very true. A lot of times in our field, we see people who might be afraid of talking about racism or talking about or asking questions. Might be seen as a taboo topic. However, if we don't talk about it, there's no way we can have transformative change. If we keep to sweep things under the rug and not addressing it head on, it's the truth of our country since we were formed, and it's frankly the truth of the world. We're not the only ones in the whole world who have racism issues. And if we don't have those conversations, it's very hard to move forward.
And again, it looks like we're getting a couple more recommendations now that are free flowing in the chat. So hopefully each of you can see that. But it looks like we had a recommendation on the conversation, how seeking and speaking the truth about racism can radically transform individuals and organizations, by Robert Livingston, who also did speak at Kirkwood, it looks like. Touched by Fire by Kay Redfield, about manic depressive illness and artistic temperaments. And then, of course, the different podcast recommendation from Kelly. I think that was perhaps one that was just mentioned. Again, I think that we can continue to learn and educate ourselves and others. I'm also curious if there were any particular aha moments that you had over the course of the last couple of days in the sessions that you attended. What was a moment of new information? What was a moment in which you realized, oh my goodness, I can do this, or we can do this as a community? Again, this is about trying to just put out there what would be some ideas that we have to help create positive social change in our communities. So even if it's just, I learned this one new piece of information, again, feel free to take yourself off camera, and you can request to be unmuted and share among your peers. And it looks like the conversation around the 1619 movement has come up. We have a couple of other book recommendations here in the chat as well. You Are Enough, about restoring hope and reclaiming your power. So is that Mr. Wilson? I see that in the chat box.
That is I.
Yes, great. We love self-promotion. That is good, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Yes, Pastor. Oops, you're still muted.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
My concern as a sociologist and many other academic disciplines, my concern is that we are coming out of this virulous pestilence, this pernicious pandemic, and yet we are not taking advantage of what Aldous Huxley once proclaimed as a brave new world. We still are utilizing memory tracks of over 3 centuries ago, including not realizing that there is no one class or ethnicity which actually can claim dominion or genesis on the North American continent. At one time, during Pangaea, all the land masses were connected by land bridges. And therefore, all peoples walked and migrated from great distances, had communal and collective experiences of heritages. But that is not effectively communicated within our historical saga as what Theodore Roosevelt called us in 1904, as a multi-sided polyglot. We have only seen American life and culture through a largely Caucasian lens, decidedly from Saxony and Scandinavia. We cannot really have an effective and cogent discourse on diversity and inclusion until all histories are respected, known, and esteemed. We just can't have in our country a month for Hispanic realization, a month to celebrate the Haight-Ashbury movement. We must celebrate all the time every strand of diversity and every strand of inclusion that creates and galvanizes this great nation. So, in other words, when we talk about things like reparation, when we talk about horrible travesties of revisionist history, where Confederate statues are being brought down, and we don't recognize that history cannot be changed, but it can only be reinterpreted according to a lens of compassion caring, and benevolence. Our country has centered too long on sagas of extremism and exclusivism. And we must now take back America, not taking back only America as one ethnicity or race sees it, but we must all take back America for the hallmark of democracy that we have. But yet there have been many people who have not been shareholders nor stakeholders in that democracy. So coming in now to the quarter of this century, we must progress forward. We must not retreat back into the darkness of alienation or ignorance. We must utilize this next half century as we come out of this pernicious pandemic, as we have come out as gophers under the ground in a sense, because we have been so self-isolated. But yet, even in the midst of that self-isolation, we have had time to reflect upon our national experience, but we are not utilizing the internet as the great equalizer, not only for education, but also to make interconnections with not only our country, but with all other countries around the world, regardless of their religious ideologies or regardless of how they perceive their existence. What are we doing now as human beings to enhance humanity, to become more humane, to have children grow up in a world which can one day be free of prejudice and racism? We're not doing it now. Why aren't we doing it?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we can hear your passion. And I agree with you completely that we need to see each other's humanity. In working with individuals who are homeless, that's one of the things I hear often is they feel stripped of their humanity because people don't look at them. They avert their eyes. And so let's not avert our eyes to racism. Let's not avert our eyes to any other kind of discrimination. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one of the biggest aspects of ensuring we have a community in which everybody feels they belong, is recognizing everybody's humanity as important as our own. So thank you. We want to offer one more time for folks to share, and then we'll be closing out shortly. So are any other thoughts? It looks like we have some fun things talking about connections and the collaborations. That's one of my favorite things of conferences, is getting like-minded people together who are passionate about transformative change. Is there one question I will ask, and then perhaps we can ask that last question, Angelica. I think that's a really great one.
Sure. The last question that we have before we close out today's session is, what is something you are committed to further your learning or taking action on regarding equity and social change? So if you think that there's one thing that you can commit to in the next 30 days, what might that be? And again, you can share that, or I know a lot of people are more comfortable just putting those things in the chat box.
It could include things like committing to reading an article around this issue. It could be a commitment to listen to a podcast of somebody who might have a different background or perspective than you. It could be a commitment to reaching out to people you might not have. I know sometimes we look at our friends and we might look very similar, we might not have diverse friends. So perhaps reaching out to individuals, like Angelica said, in the Whova app, you can see who else is a participant here. Reach out to somebody and ask for, either a Zoom conversation. I think that's one of the best ways to build community is those conversations. So are there any thoughts on what folks would like to do? Thank you, Tony. That's a great idea. He's committed to connect with at least one person or organization who attended the conference. Perfect.
Another recommendation, many of you may have participated in United Way's 21-day equity challenge that was in September. That information continues to live on our website. So even just taking a look at each of the days, there are many different topics from abilities and disabilities to the LGBTQ community, redlining and criminal justice. You can take a look at those days and just commit to reading through one of them. There are lots of modes of learning from reading, watching, listening, and even exploring some different resources online. So we encourage you to do that as well. Phoenix has added that they are committed to supporting fellow LGBTQ youth, especially considering how schools have not done a very good job. And it's also hard to find teen centers. There are some resources in the community. Teenager Place has a teen center. So I encourage anybody who is familiar with those resources to reach out to Phoenix also and share that. Allison is going to learn more about local food systems and how what we have here already and what we can do to add to our community, to help our community. So again, thank each of you for committing. Nathan, for yourself, he's going to do a better job of self-education and not just taking in information, but diving in deeper and being intentional. Appreciate those thoughts, Nathan. Nathan serves on the Inclusive ICR Advisory Council with both Stephanie and I hope he doesn't mind sharing or us sharing on his behalf. If so, then maybe frantically turn your camera on and say, don't say anything. But on Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think it has been an opportunity for a lot of people to learn more about why Indigenous Peoples Day is a priority for us and to recognize that as a holiday and no longer to recognize Columbus Day. But, I think for Nathan, it was a very eye-opening experience and not just maybe reading a post, but diving deeper into the information and then processing that, deciding what that means, and then also being willing to share that with other people. I think it was perhaps out of Nathan's comfort zone to share that with other people on our committee. And we're so grateful that he did, because to us who have been minoritized in the past and oppressed, it really means a lot. So I see Nathan has taken himself, has put his camera on. So do you want to share any more? We do actually have some time left in the session for anyone who's still around.
Thank you. You captured it well. It's not, I think for myself, I just have to continue to keep stepping outside that comfort zone and continue to educate myself. And on Columbus Day or on Indigenous, see, it's still like, it's not right to even put that name out there, in my opinion, from what I've read and how people were treated when that trip came over to North America. I read just an article that had some quotes from the pastor or the minister that was on the ship, and how those native Indigenous people were treated when that ship arrived, and immediately taking them into slavery. And it was eye-opening to hear, or not hear, but read about these things, and just made me sick to my stomach. The fact that, like, I have a calendar at work. It's an otter calendar with really silly quotes on it, but right on the calendar, it said Columbus Day. And I intentionally just scribbled it off that day and wrote Indigenous Day on there. And it's something that I want to be more intentional with. And I have to continue to self-educate myself so I can do a better job of talking to my children just about all these different topics. And I think there's just an opportunity to better understand and seek out the information.
Thank you so much for your willingness to share. Yes, Pastor Sorrentino, and then we'll need to close out shortly. So please keep your comments brief.
Nathan, I appreciate that perspective. I understand that Columbus has been viewed in a very negative light. But you must also understand that that also comes from the segment of radical intelligentsia who have taken a microcosm of that experience, horrifically, of course, with Santo Domingo. But you also need to understand that if you take Columbus Day away, then you negate the dreams of Italian Americans who have come to these shores and who have utilized Columbus as a patron saint, more or less. But you must also remember that Columbus himself was controlled by the political predilections of Spain. So therefore, we cannot excise any aspect of history. What are we going to bring future generations 500 years from now? Because if we create a purist perspective and experience for futuristic school children, how are they going to be able to understand us, our struggles, our privations, what we did in our time on this earth in order to create a more egalitarian and a more perspective of equality and fairness? Revisionist history can never be tolerated. It cannot be tolerated in Texas right now in Parkland, and it cannot be tolerated in any country of this earth. We must accept our history as we have written it, and then we must improve it, not vanquish it, but improve it.
And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think my concern is at what appropriate age do we introduce our history and the truth of our history? Because I feel like right now, it's not being communicated in our school and our curriculum the way that it really occurred. And reading what I've read, you know, in the last week, there's things that I never knew and that I didn't learn that in school. And honestly, I don't know if it would have been appropriate for me to learn what and how those indigenous people were treated when Columbus arrived. And that would be my concern is then you got to start thinking through, when do you introduce this curriculum to, and I agree, we want the full history, but we want the full history in its truth and what it really is. And I feel like we only get a taste of that history right now with the way we introduce Columbus Day to our society, to our children, and how we show the rest of the world who we are as a culture. And that bothers me tremendously.
And I realize, Nathan, that does bother you, and I appreciate that greatly. As president of this ministry and as an academic, I have written over 40 years, many articles and books which have addressed these issues. But I want you to clearly understand that the way that we educate children now is barbaric. We are still living in a modality and a methodology 300 years old. Brick and mortar schools are going to become a thing of the past in less than 50 years. We will be educating children now so they can reach the zenith of their possibilities and the penultimate of their dreams. We cannot do that now with traditional rubric education. And we cannot do this with criterion referencing grades. The Vermont portfolio experiment of 1987, which was based on the 1963 British classroom open paradigm, was certainly a step in the right direction. When I taught at Northern Illinois University, I wrote a monograph in 1994 advocating that we should start thinking outside the box, that we should no longer be warehousing children in incubators of educational sterility, but that we should be having children design their own horizons of learning based upon Vygotsky's horizons of learning as interfaced with Gagne's taxonomy of multiple intelligences. Bloom's taxonomy no longer must hold sway in any way, shape, or form in teacher certification systems or education. We need, we talked today about entrepreneurship. I realize that that is a watchword today of the younger generations. And considering that when I look at what's happening with President Biden's Build Back Agenda program, and I've commented on that in Washington quite a lot to both sides of the aisle, and I have received comments from both sides of the aisle concerning it, so I'm not going to dwell in those arguments. But one continuous link that both sides of the aisle possess is the fact that we all recognize that our current economic systems, as they have come down to us from Simone de Beauvoir, for example, that when we look back at Sinclair and his idea of the elite, and we start to have what we had even back in Reagan years of trickle-down economics, where rich people were given tax shelters, and unfortunately, people of privation, people of lower, quote unquote, socioeconomic status, that they were the ones who things filtered down to. We have got to end this nonsense. We have to start looking as a collective people, as a society, which Rousseau told us about in the social contract. We need to covenant together so we can look at our collective histories, so we can also mourn the atrocities.
Thank you so much, Pastor Sorrentino. We do have just a little bit of time, and we want to allow others who were here today to share any additional information. We encourage you, Pastor Sorrentino, to connect with others here. I know that we had suggested to go to the Whova app. There is a list of attendees there if there's anyone in particular that you want to connect with. It does look like we have one of our other attendees who had taken themselves, put themselves on camera. So I'm not sure if Liv was wanting to share, but the space is yours if you would like to put yourself on camera or take yourself off mute and add any additional thoughts or comments. Could have just been a technology bug where suddenly we're frightened that we are on camera, and that's up to you. Again, we just want to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation today. We have definitely heard some great suggestions on continued learning, lots of resources for books and podcasts. And, a few very passionate individuals have shared some of their thoughts and concerns. And our hope is that you can collaborate with other attendees from the conference and start thinking through what are some action items, what are the steps that you can take, how can you be an ally, how can you be an advocate, and how can you be an activist. I know that Stephanie and I welcome continued conversation from anyone in the community, so please feel free to reach out to either one of us if you have any questions. Stephanie, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I just appreciate the willingness of everybody to have conversation and to show up. That's the biggest way in which we can impact change, is showing up. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for sharing your passion. And as we have said a few times, please do connect with one another. Again, one of the best ways is showing up and connection. So I have nothing else to add. So thank you so very much, everybody.
Thank you. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.